Okay. Okay, good evening. My name is Uwe Wagner, very German name as you can tell. On behalf of both the Churchill Club and GABA, I'm pleased to welcome you to tonight's program, Cloud 2011. And I want to share something with you which is very personal, because cloud computing, this is not the first panel discussion we are having here at SAP on cloud computing. We didn't call it cloud because 5 years ago the word didn't exist. I think, Roland, you were one of the first, and Greg on the panel. We called it utility computing or grid computing or adaptive computing, or there were probably 100 other names out there. So I think one of the challenges for tonight's panel is going to be, is cloud computing real or just another buzzword du jour? Anyway, I have with us tonight Simon Crosby from Citrix. Simon, welcome. Gregory Smith from T-Systems, Roland Wartenberg from SAP, and Joe Weinman from AT&T. And of course, our moderator, Rachel Chalmers from the 451 group. Everyone, thank you for being here. I would also like to thank SAP for hosting tonight's program and event, and for the great bar out there. Both GABA, which by the way stands for German American Business Association, and the Churchill Club are member-supported non-profit organizations dedicated to advancing innovation and economic vitality. GABA promotes transatlantic knowledge, sharing and networking among German, American, and Californian business and tech communities, with chapters in both Northern California, Southern California, and 2 chapters in Germany, 1 in Berlin and 1 in Munich. GABA is organized into 10 industry groups, ranging from automotive to clean tech, life science, media, entertainment, and 6 others. I am the co-chair of the software group, and you can find the complete list on our website or on the leaflets we put on your chair. Churchill Club, on the other side, is a legendary networking group founded in Silicon Valley in 1985. Karen Tucker, the Churchill Club CIO, is here tonight. And Karen, would you mind getting up and waving? Thank you. Churchill Club is known the world over for its smart, provocative programs on leadership and innovation, featuring in-depth conversations among industry leaders such as, start with SAP, Hasso Plattner, Mark Templeton, Larry Ellison, and you may have seen, some of you may have seen the YouTube feature with Larry Ellison and Ed Zender and Scott McNeely on YouTube. So you know about Larry Ellison's thoughts about cloud computing. John Chambers from Cisco, Randall Stevenson, and score of others. Their program address what's new, what's next, what's not known in business and technology. Both GABA and Churchill Club offer both corporate and individual memberships and a calendar of high-quality events. Again, for more details, please check your printed programs on your seat and or check with the Churchill Club and GABA volunteers outside in the lobby. And information, of course, is also available on the web. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Rachel Chambers. Rachel has led the infrastructure software practice for the 451 group since its debut in 2000, where she focuses on data center automation and server desktop application virtualization. Rachel began covering the technology sector in 1995 when she helped launch Computer Week, later PC Week Australia, for Australian provincial newspaper. She also worked as deputy editor of the award-winning MIS magazine. She is certainly very well qualified to lead our discussion tonight, and we are thrilled to have you with us, Rachel. Please come on stage.
Thank you all. It's certainly a pleasure to be here. As Uwe indicated, all of us are old hands at this circuit. We have been on panels together since what we're talking about was grid computing. So as such, we've been granted compassionate leave never to have to define our subject matter again. We don't have to spend an hour defining cloud anymore. Our doctors have given us notes. So because you're all extremely intelligent, we know this because you managed to register before the event sold out and because you wanted to come in any case, we're going to assume that you can keep up with the basic concepts here, what cloud computing is, that it's a delivery method, and that we talk about it at three levels: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. We're going to take those as axiomatic, and instead of having a backward-looking conversation, as so many of ours have been, we're going to try and have a forward-looking conversation. We're going to talk about cloud computing next year and in the years to come, what it will look like, how it will change. I'm going to let each of my panelists introduce himself briefly. I'll cut them off if they become loquacious. And then I'll throw carefully tailored questions to each of them to try and trip them up. Then I've got a list of difficult questions for the whole panel to deal with. And if that becomes tedious, I will throw it to the open group. In any case, after an hour, I will invite you into the discussion and let you take part in the torturing of my friends here. So with that, Roland, would you like to kick off?
Thanks, Rachel. So, maybe I have to switch it on. The cloud's not on. The cloud is not on. It's a phone cloud, microphone cloud. So, my name is Roland Württemberg. I'm working for SAP, actually for quite some time now, since the 1993. Maybe you hear my nice German accent. I tried to get rid of that, but it's not working. So I started to work for SAP in Germany, moved over to Palo Alto in 2000, because I heard there's always sunny weather here. I don't know, today it's a little bit different. No, just kidding. I worked here for a company called SAP Markets. So we had a startup company here working the area of commerce marketplaces. I moved actually back to Walldorf in 2003 and came back to Palo Alto in 2006. So I moved twice back and forward. So if you want to know how it is to relocate back and forward to the United States, I'm a perfect reference customer. At SAP, I'm working on topics on cloud computing, virtualization, and green IT, and I happen to be in the position to run the SAP Virtualization Week here in SAP Labs Palo Alto. And I'm actually very happy that so many of you found a way today to SAP Labs to listen to our panels and to me here. Thanks so very much. It wasn't just me.
Hello, my name is Simon Crosby. I'm a long time ago I was an academic, and I thought that I'd found my favorite job in the world, and then I discovered startups. I moved to Silicon Valley 10 years ago, and had one major failure. Spent $50 million and learned a lot. And so the next time around, I did it with some smarter people. And that was a company called ZenSource, which built a little hypervisor, which has done some pretty cool things in the world. And along the way, I met all the smart people around us here. I'm now part of Citrix, who acquired my company ZenSource, where I'm CTO for data center and cloud.
Right.
Waiting for my green light. There we go. Gregory Smith. I'm with T-Systems, which is part of the Deutsche Telekom family of companies. T-Mobile, you probably know. So I'm responsible here in North America for all of our technical solutions, our portfolio of services, cloud computing, for all our delivery factories here. So I spend a lot of time interacting with a lot of partners that are here in the audience, go out and do a lot of customer deals and big deal solutioning for outsourcing. So I sort of have a sort of long history in those sorts of engagements and sort of seeing, here's cloud or here's grid computing or whatever, the du jour state of IT is and trying to apply that into actual real companies. I have a long background with SAP. I ran, Sun Microsystems Global SAP Competency Center practice for a number of years, and so we've all been sort of hammering away on a lot of these virtualization problems, across Unix and Windows for quite a lot of years, and it's getting really fun now. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Joe Weinman, AT&T. My story really begins with my great-grandparents.
Oh.
Oh, are we out of time? Sorry. All right. I do strategy and business development at AT&T, and I've focused on the cloud space since back when it was just the utility computing space, which I guess is not that long, but long enough. And I spent about half my career at what was then called Bell Labs, and about half in corporate and on the business side. So my interests are really at the intersection of technology and strategy and economics.
It's the economic stuff that's been really interesting lately. You've been proximally famous.
Boy, that was a good lead-in.
For the 10 laws of cloudonomics. You've been doing a lot of work bringing economics metaphors into cloud practice. One of your 10 laws is that aggregate demand for compute resources is smoother than individual demand. It's a sort of generalization of the idea of economies of scale. And it sounds great, and it is indeed the principle by which Amazon is making a lot of money right now. What I'm concerned about is if a cloud provider gets a lot of companies that are retailers that experience peak volume at Christmas, or tax preparers that experience a lot of business like right now, those peaks are going to coincide with one another, and even Amazon is going to run out of capacity. Have we just moved the problem of elastic capacity from on-premise to the third party?
That's a good question, Rachel.
I worked hard on it. The rest are terrible.
So for those of you that haven't thought about this before, clearly in any cloud-based service provider, one of the tricks is how do you maintain a compelling value proposition, and one of the ways to do that is around doing some things better than, say, an enterprise can do for itself. I believe that one of the inherent advantages that larger cloud service providers have has to do with the statistical behavior of adding random, at least uncorrelated or decorrelated demand. So what that says is that, exactly, so what that says is that if you have a e-tailer who's busy on, let's say, Thanksgiving, Cyber Monday, and or the month of December, that is a great partner, as it were, in terms of a demand portfolio to add in with, say, a tax preparation firm is great to add in with a movie ticket vendor, et cetera. So people talk a lot about economies of scale in the cloud. That's sort of an interesting argument that we could probably spend about the entire hour panel going through, because I think there are lots of benefits to the cloud. I've used it myself, but I think that the economies of scale argument is actually the wrong way to go. However, the statistics of scale or the statistics of diversity do suggest that you can get a lower peak relative to the demand that you need and better average utilization if you do in fact have a fairly diverse set of customers. And so the key thing that then suggests is that there are inherent advantages to scale, perhaps not so much in terms of merely scale, but in terms of that a larger provider can therefore get a more diverse set of customers, and that more diverse set of customers can generate favorable economics.
So more planning than just blindly assuming that everyone's going to work out together.
Right, and actually part of it is if you just assume that you're fairly broadly targeting, then that's great. I'm sure virtually everyone in this room has read The Big Switch, and for me one of the fascinating little factoids in there was Samuel Insull back in the, 1900 or so time frame as they were starting to move to what I would call cloud-based electricity. So electricity delivered instead of on-premises network delivered via a hyperscale pay-per-use on-demand utility, which back then was just called a power plant. What he did was he realized that he needed to get both the trolley service providers on board who really used a lot of electricity during the morning and the afternoon rush hours, then get the factories on board who needed a lot of electricity during the day, and then get consumers on board who obviously needed it before going to work and then in the evening. And so you can certainly target demand. One of the things it says is that sort of if community cloud means all e-tailers, that's probably a bad way to go because it sort of limits the benefits through statistical multiplexing. If community means either a supply chain or a group of people that maybe have different requirements, for example, radiologists versus physicians versus surgical prep folks, then that's probably a good type of community from a at least utilization perspective. And there's more to life than utilization, of course.
Greg, you've actually experienced a lot of Joe's laws of cloudonomics at first hand. I love your quote that a classic hosting environment is not very cost effective, and the smaller the customer gets, the less cost effective it gets. It's sort of the economy of scale argument from the other end. You've actually built out a VMware-based hosted service, and you've achieved better utilization and uptime and platform agnosticism. But what about the cost? You used all proprietary software licenses for that particular installation. Isn't that cost going to add considerably to what you pass on to your customer? Most hosters have gone open source. Can you talk a little bit about that decision?
Well, so, yeah, I mean, you have to understand the costs of us custom developing functionality is far higher than it is to purchase it from a vendor who, assuming they're aligned to what we're doing, can deliver to us, right? So we do a lot of custom IP work because the cloud management sphere, so everything we need to actually run and operate this beast is not, somebody hasn't just said, oh, here's the whole package, you just use it and it costs X dollars, right? So we're aggregating all these different tool sets, we're running our own things, gluing it all together so we have this big beast in the background that will deliver this fairly simple service. So it's cheaper to let someone else carry those development costs than for us to do it. So that's sort of, fundamental. It's kind of the easy answer. There's open source. Yes, we leverage that. Clearly, we'd rather not pay for something, or at least pay for a more simple support environment than really pay sort of proprietary licensing issue. But again, as we talk about Amazon, and people kind of understand that in Google, but we're coming from trying to take big enterprise IT shops that are basically the old, we have our own power system and our own plant sort of people, and we're trying to bring them out into a cloud environment, but we have to maintain the requirements that they have. Could be uptime, SLAs, we got to pay penalties if we don't deliver, all of these sorts of things. Now, they're going to change a little bit over time, so we talk about 2011. So those people will probably not have the same demands or requirements in 2 years than they do now, but we have to cater to them because, hey, they're our customers. We want them to buy our stuff, right? So we're moving them up. So being in proprietary land is okay because that's the land they're in. We just need to deliver to them more efficiently, better, faster, using not only scale arguments, but simply just the out-and-out complexity that if you look at today, if you take all the vendors that were here and everybody talked about at the event today and say, okay, if you were a single company and you wanted to put all those tools together and make it all work, the amount of time, effort, and costs and heartache to do that is gigantic. And by the way, that's not even your core business. Right? Why are you even wasting time doing that? It's our core business to do that, and we've already solved the problem a bunch of times, and we're working with vendors down on the engineering level, fixing all these bugs and problems. That's our job, so we can give you a clean service. So,
Simon, do you have any thoughts on open source cloud alternatives by any chance?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the cloud, in every instance in which we know it, SaaS, platform, and infrastructure as a service, would not exist were it not for open source. Okay? There is nobody, and that's for several reasons. First of all, the existence of an open source code base allowed people to go off and build software that worked at cloud scale. But no enterprise software does that. And so, would a thing such as MapReduce have shown up ever if I had to build it inside of Windows? No, it wouldn't. We just know that. Okay. So it turns out perhaps that that the original conception of open source as a business model, which is, hey, I invented this thing which is open source. Hey, Mr. Enterprise customer, take this thing. I will support you, is maybe not the right way for open source to go to market. Maybe the way for open source to go to market is as services, right? It turns out a bunch of people are doing some pretty cool stuff with open source software. They also contribute back, but not everything, right?
That's what I was going to say. There's a pretty big catch there, isn't there? You wrote very interestingly about this recently. Open source doesn't necessarily mean interoperability or arriving at a standard. There's a loophole in the GPL if you're offering that open source as a hosted service. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, sure. I mean, in general, I think it's fair to say that open source and the availability of software means that anybody can randomly permute the bits and change it into their own thing. In the traditional GPL, GPL v2, they're obliged to publish the change only if they deliver it to a customer, which implies that you're delivering a software product. If you're a service provider, you're not obliged to deliver the change. And so really what the large cloud folk have done, of all varieties, is consume open source software and turn it into proprietary software. By the way, there's no religion here. I have no biases whatsoever. They generally are good at fostering the continued development of open source software. And where it matters to them to get community engagement around a thing, they do generally open it up. By the way, I think everybody who's making any money out of open source software is basically mixing it in some way with a proprietary piece. Even Red Hat's business model, to some extent, used to depend on it. They've gone, more towards just being pure open now, and probably they are one of the few vendors who are really manic about being open. But look at Oracle. All they want to do is to have you not pay anybody else for the OS, right? But they're going to sell you an expensive app stack. So, I think there's an emerging capability assessment for open source, which is that open source is great at accelerating development. It's great at catalyzing new business models. It's great at commoditizing certain layers of the stack and accelerating them. It's great at getting people to work on a common shared piece of infrastructure that many people can reuse. And that's fine. And it's just another way of doing software development. It's not necessarily a business model. And that's just the way it is. So, I don't think that there's a particular religion around something having to be open. Things get opened either as software or as standards according to vendor demand. And that's always been the case.
From open source infrastructure to proprietary software and platform as a service, Roland, SAP has a new management team and brand new cloud-based collaboration apps. Coincidence or conspiracy?
Well, so we're talking about Streamworks here, so our 12 sprint ads. And actually, I was one of the first beta tester, and that was the middle of last year. And the new management team came in a little bit later, so I think there's no relationship with that. But that SAP is now also looking in development of these cloud-based applications that really shows that actually we listen very carefully to our customer, what they want to have. And at SAP, we are simply the leader in enterprise application business, no question about it. When I look at the spear here, most probably, as we heard this morning from Kai Vandelo, with 65% probability, this spear was produced with SAP behind it. Isn't that mission critical now, that beer, as Kai asked this morning? I know.
Critical. Definitely.
And of course, customers.
High volume, too.
High volume, all right. Most probably it's water as well. But seriously, our customers, we look at very carefully where they run the business processes. So they expect from us really to connect the core systems which normally run in the back end, so the ERP, the CRM, everything what we have out there, to connect or to enable them to connect it to the new world, everything what runs in the cloud, like our new cloud-based collaboration platform here. And I think security is here very important because you want to connect these two worlds. How you bring in your business process from the inside data center, how you connect to the outside, either in a private cloud environment or in a public cloud environment. I think that's the important question here. To come back to your question, it's not related to each other. No.
It does see you competing pretty much more head-to-head than you have in the past with Oracle and Google. How's that feel? That's got to be a bit tense.
Oh, well, I'm now with SAP since 97. Actually, before that, I was 4 years of contract. So let's say 93. So that's 70 years. And I always love competition because it's really good for our customers. Competition really makes us work harder, work better, try to be better than the competitor, and at the end of the day, it's good for our customers. And when I look at the names you just mentioned, well, we at SAP, we rely, and I'm so happy that can sit now together with these three gentlemen here on this panel, we really focus on our ecosystem. So we try not to reinvent the wheel, not to get in competition with everyone else, really to see how we can work together as partners to offer them the best integrated solution to customers. So personally, I really like competition because it really helps us to deliver better products. And when I look at cloud computing, to be open, first when I heard cloud computing, and by the way, I'm in the area of virtualization and grid computing since the beginning. Actually, even before I worked for SAP, I worked for digital equipment. Maybe some of you still remember that company. Open.
Let go of the past, Rob.
Yeah, that's very. Yes, we want to look in the future, right?
Let digital die. No, sorry,
But
digital.
the first time when I heard cloud computing, I said, uh-oh. When we look at this word, and Uwe mentioned that, we had utility computing, we had adaptive computing, hybrid, we had a lot of computing things. You could understand it much, much better than cloud computing. Cloud, you can make a lot of jokes with cloud. It's cloudy out there. And when you look at the weather, there were some clouds out there as well. So I think cloud computing is really challenging now from a definition point of view. And that's what we at SAP really to try to understand, what our customer understands or not, and how we can then fulfill or deliver better products to be better than our competitors. That is everything what it's about.
So it's keep your friends close and your enemies closer. That's fair.
Can I just jump in with one quick thing?
Will it be quick?
Yes. If in geological era times.
I don't fear
So,
to interrupt you.
since I have short time, I won't even mention that the Twitter hashtag for the event is Churchill Club, because I know there's not enough time to say that. So what I will say instead is that around the open source argument, one of the things I think is most interesting, especially if we think about Cloud 2011, is the current software models often for cloud seem to be you save a few nickels on the infrastructure, but you spend a fortune on the software licenses. And so to me, it just seems like that's one of the key drivers for open source. Now, beyond that, if some of the software companies that are here start to think innovatively about how they can come up with more than just multi-core licenses, but even per-minute term licenses for software or other innovations, for example, that are CPU utilization-based. For example, John was at your facility a few years ago talking about some of the cycle counting in the kernel of VMware, and that offers an opportunity for being able to do very fine-grained pricing that is utilization-based and therefore aligned with the infrastructure model.
So, let me just go on your theme. You know, we're going to have, the only interesting curve in the industry is Moore's Law. It's still pretty healthy. So we're going to have 48 cores very soon. I want to see anybody in this audience raise their hand who can figure out how to pay Larry Ellison enough money for Oracle on a 48-core server. Could you afford that? You cannot. You cannot afford it. But you may be, I mean, it may bankrupt you, but you could probably afford VMware. Not for long. But you cannot afford a model which continues like this, okay? So it has to be the case that the model has to change. It is not tenable for these layers of infrastructure to continue to be priced based on units of hardware which are being generated at Moore's Law. The other way to think of it is, I mean, in the US here, it's tax day tomorrow, right? So we're taxing Moore's Law, right? That is, because Moore's generating all these cores for us, we're trying to index this thing in the wrong way. So I think we have to just get out of that model entirely. I just don't believe it's a tenable way for the software industry to continue to develop. And anybody who sticks to that should get a kick in the pants. I just think it's bad.
But, you know, and this is quite correct. I mean, from our standpoint, the many hundreds of millions of dollars that we pay certain vendors in licensing is shocking if you look at it. And, you know, we put pressure on Oracle, and people say, look, we need, you know, some sort of consumption-based model.
It needs
somehow,
to be
right?
value-based.
It has to be value-based, right? So, but they're not going to move because they've done the math, and they know that if they move from where they are today to where it should be, they're going to lose truckloads of money. So, they're like, fingers in the ground being dragged, right? So I understand that from a business standpoint, but what we do, and what will happen more is, so we shy away from that as much as possible. We throw them under the bus, licensing-wise. Say, look, I'm not going to use your stuff for this, this, and this. That has a certain effect, but the point I want to make is, we have cloud world, and then we have everybody's internal IT world. And the problem is, and it's not just, you pick any vendor, are all trying to navigate these two things right now. They don't want to cannibalize the amount of good margin money they're making internally IT.
That's right. That's right.
But they've got to play the cloud game, and they're all just sort of trying to figure out what's going to happen. But until, if you think, like, go out in the future, right? If this becomes very, very small and people stop buying servers and making their own power plants and all that sort of stuff, and it all goes really much more service provider driven, then, of course, the ability of any one vendor to drive that model, because they're actually just trying to differentiate themselves in the market, and the lock-in gets weaker and weaker. So now you have all these vendors that actually, who love the cloud, but are going to actually fight against it because they are becoming commoditized underneath.
Absolutely.
Where we'll just say, I don't know, I just want something that fits this. Can you do this cheaper than that guy? Oh, no, I don't know.
But here's where it changes for Larry, because now with a single API call, I can get a 1 terabyte MySQL database in Amazon EC2 with a 15-day window of second-level granularity with transactional-level integrity, and it's freely backed up for me, and all I have to pay for is the storage and the compute. That rocks.
Yeah, I think this is key. I think you're exactly right. The dominant model that we're seeing emerging is on-premise infrastructure with elastic capacity rented out of the cloud. And that's just at the infrastructure layer. I mean, that's a really interesting and complex picture, and people are learning new ways to pay for compute capacity. At the platform as a service layer, we've got an even more complex picture with VMware and Google wooing a developer army. And how do you think enterprise software vendors are going to be able to position themselves for that war beyond this war? I mean, they're having enough difficulty adapting to how infrastructure as a service is changing purchasing. What happens when you factor the platform and the developer ecosystem into that as well?
I'll have a stab. So I'm down on platform as a service as a play. Okay, so in general, everybody who I talk to, they say, okay, great, am I going to write my app on this platform or that platform? They're inherently suspicious of what the platform guy is going to do to them. So, if you went and write your app on Azure, is Microsoft going to tax you this much? Or if you're going to do it on, on some platform by Google, how stuck am I? How do I get my data out? How do I make sure it's always going to run? A ton of issues, right? So I think platform as a service emerges over time. By the way, platform is it's a horizontal line, and how long can it remain stationary anyway, right? So I think the platform emerges from the infrastructure guys adding more and more sticky things to the infrastructure. I mean, is MySQL through an API call platform infrastructure? Well, that's an interesting question, but it's pretty sticky. And so once I'm there, I start to stick, and then I start to write more apps to that set of services that they offer me, and oh, hey presto, suddenly it's an app platform. And so I don't have a huge amount of faith in people's APIs, which are supposed to solve the next generation problems for humanity. Just look at JBoss and where it went, and then Spring, which came along and said, oh, you just won, right? So the notion of today's platform is just tomorrow's inferior level of stuff. And I think that we'll see rapid commoditization of key chunks of the enterprise stack as people start to implement it as service components.
It's interesting. I sort of agree and disagree. I do definitely see platform as a service as the next generation of the web application server, in the sense of enabling a broad class of applications by abstracting away a bunch of those functions. But I don't necessarily agree that people are as worried about vendor lock-in as open source people seem to think that they are. I think the Microsoft developer army are perfectly happy to develop on Azure and have their future committed to Microsoft, because they've always had their future committed to Microsoft.
Yes.
I think when we put open source goggles on, we miss huge sectors of the market.
We must lead them from the darkness. That's really what's happening, right?
Yeah.
We can't take them there right away. We need
Yeah.
to say, you can do it out here, you can do platform, out in the cloud, and they'll all wander down that way. Eventually, there'll be a bright, shiny rainbow.
Actually,
and we'll be
Microsoft's always
Unicorn
been very
computing.
ecosystem.
Yeah, unicorn computing.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that Microsoft's always been more ecosystem-centric than any one of these other guys, right? I mean, there's no ecosystem around any one of the other cloud guys, including Google. So,
Isn't Paul Moritz explicitly trying to build out a Microsoft strategy here with the acquisition of SpringSource? And yesterday, MQ.
more of an enterprise strategy, sure, absolutely. Yeah, he's a rational chap.
So, I mean, all these are multidimensional issues, right? And so part of the things that you've got to look at. Certainly the lock-in issue is a concern, but also what is the size of the developer ecosystem? If you have 100,000 plus developers, that's great. And so, language retraining, and the problem is that lock-in is an issue that occurs in the future, whereas meeting your budget is an issue, and time frames for development are an issue that occurs in the present. And people have a nasty habit of making present trade-offs and the future be ignored.
They do, and except for certain things that they really, really worry about, like enterprise mission-critical data. And there, you have not seen those things jump to the cloud. What you've seen is stuff that they're okay if they lose, or they don't know how they can reason about it if they get it back again later. And I think we have to cross a major chasm to get to the point where people are prepared to trust mission-critical data to clouds. There are a few point instances, and maybe the cloud analogy is a little stretching it a little, but if you look at something like Cerner and McKesson in healthcare, they're kind of HIPAA clouds. They would think of themselves as that. And they've done a great job of building a HIPAA quality infrastructure. And so they can claim to be that. But in general, we're highly regulated, or, any security constraints apply. There are major challenges with adopting
Sure,
them.
or tightly coupled applications on the back end,
Right.
or legacy systems built in mainframe environments in TPF.
Right. So I think it's also worth pointing out that there's two kinds. Oh gosh, we're going to get into definitions now. The kind of Amazon EC2 style cloud it's maybe just grid, it's virtual private server, and that's generally what people talk about when they think about infrastructure as a service. But the folks who are like Joe, who actually have a fiber arriving at your enterprise and have been a trusted provider for years, who then add an elastic capacity for compute behind them, you trust them. And you're already sending all your mission-critical data over those pipes, so why wouldn't you let him run it on his server? That's very interesting, and I think those folks have the real opportunity in the enterprise segment to persuade that movement of mission-critical stuff.
Well, this is a conversation I've been
Companies
having
like
with you guys.
AT&T can really only be trusted providers when they rely on software from companies like Citrix.
Yeah. I thought you were here. Actually, I thought he was here. I thought he was here to persuade me not to jailbreak my iPhone, but I'm going to do it.
It's a much more serious one than it seems, because when we look at things like the Google data breach, which compromised the identities of many dissidents in China, we're actually looking at the vulnerability of cloud-based hosted services and the implications of security, not just to mission-critical data, but to national security. This is why we see government agencies building out a segregated cloud where they can achieve economies of scale without necessarily being exposed to the risks of the public cloud.
Don't mix retail public cloud land as it exists today with enterprise cloud land that exists today. This is kind of my point, right?
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, what we have to do as an enterprise provider, we're doing, whatever, all these big major companies, Philips, all these guys, all of their global stuff, highly proprietary, very guarded. We have HIPAA compliant cloud. We worry about that, but that's why we don't look like Amazon.
Right.
So
Right?
why
It's
does-
a different world. So those worlds are coming together.
Yeah.
And the enterprise people are learning to think like, I want Amazon stuff, right? And the Amazon people, these people are saying, I want more SLAs and I want to be able to buy penalties. So these are moving together, but we are where we are.
But the cost structures will also move as a result, right?
Correct.
Because when you
I
have
think this
enterprise
is
sales and security and service and support, then all of a sudden you have, to Simon's point, you have a trusted provider that's offering enterprise-grade carrier-class services. The other benefit is, I think that if you look at what's going on with the cloud right now, there are a few problems that people are familiar with but don't always highlight. One of the ones we just talked about around software licensing fees. The other one is, what do you do with large databases? So I think it's very humorous that we can spin up a server in 1 minute, and the data for that server will be there 24 hours later when the FedEx disk arrives, right? So it's a little bit of a mismatch. So to Simon's point, what that therefore says is that you want to have the shortest possible path at the lowest possible cost with the highest available bandwidth. And certainly something like Metro DWDM, at 10 gig and 40 gig now, going to 100 and 120 gig in the very foreseeable future, much less things like broadband wireless for some lower end applications, gives you the solution to the data problem and the data synchronization. So in all the scenarios, for example, Rachel, you mentioned that cloud bursting scenario, and as I think you know, I've looked at this in depth from a mathematical perspective, and the economic optimum for virtually anyone is through a hybrid architecture where, in effect, the base is handled within the enterprise and the spikes are dealt with in the cloud for many applications. That, in turn, implies a high degree of data synchronization, coordination, and either remote data access and or mirroring and replication, which in turn drives you to an argument that says you've got to have those high bandwidth, and over time, speaking of Cloud 2011, you're going to have that on demand, right? Because just like the software, you're not going to want to pay for any other infrastructure resources on a fixed basis to be able to leverage the benefits of on demand.
Okay,
I think in general
I do want to come back to this, but you phone guys managed to skate over the real issue again without necessarily being challenged, and I want to call you on it.
There you go.
Whenever security comes up, you guys get up and you wave your hands and you say, we'll build you a totally secure system. It'll cost you 100 times as much, but it'll be totally secure. We promise it's all proprietary software. Why can't
I
we have
disagree,
an open
Rachel.
platform That's also
So I had this conversation in the hall.
Are you one of the phone guys?
Yeah.
You're going to be
Yeah,
one of the phone guys.
he's
Okay.
the
Phone guys, look.
the phone guys.
But seriously, I mean, I understand the point, but here's one of the issues. I had this conversation today earlier. It's like, look, secure as defined by who?
Secure is defined by my dissidents in China.
No. The companies say, is my data secure? Secure in like what kind of way? I mean, do you
didn't
want
hear about-
SAS 70 controls on who accesses your data? Are you worried about technological separation of data on filer heads? I mean, and what about the VLANs in the network? What about the Juniper firewalls? What about the telco circuits?
Right.
What part of that?
He's waving his hands again. You
No.
can see him.
I'm simply saying that my answer, we have to answer this to our customers. I deliver their data. They ask the question, and the answer is there's no, people tend to rely and have historically to say, do you have SAS 70 certification? Do you have HIPAA? Yeah, it's like, so you have to go through this, but if you don't show a recognized standardization security certification, it's meaningless, right? Because no one will believe you. You say, oh, I do the stuff. I hired a company to do intrusion detection, and they're like, oh, okay, but but they always fall back to only these global or pseudo-global standards, and those do not exist for a cloud that includes compute, storage, network, connectivity. That I can go to some company and say, I'm going to pay you a bunch of money. I want your global certification says the customer's data is safe. And I can go to the customer and say, there you go, it's my certification. That's what they want. Does not exist.
As the
That's
resident,
it. So we rely. And one other point, which doesn't mean it's not secure, but it means that we're relying on the same person, because it's the same people managing the same gear in the same way with the same access and the same circuits, all that stuff that customers have today, or even old school outsourcing. It's not radically different. So essentially it's secure, but it's still the fundamental problem. Customer says, oh, my employees have access to data in my data center, so that's a certain legal situation, right? And as soon as I have other people accessing my data, it's a very different legal situation. So even if I have bad security with my employees, it's okay because they're all on my company, and legally it's different. I can have good security, but your guys are looking at my stuff, and now I'm worried.
That's right.
Roland, did you
So-
want to jump in there?
Yes, I want to jump in because somehow I happen to agree to you, Craig, as always. Sometimes. But shouldn't there, and I go back to your question, shouldn't there be a way to have the same level of security as many of our customer requests have to deliver, but with a new way of flexibility? Because in the moment,
Yes,
if
there
you
is.
have to come
So
back
it
to
exists.
customers,
It exists.
let me
It
finish.
exists.
If you come back to customers and tell them, well, you get to your secure environment, but it's basically looking like what we had since 10 years, well, what's the point?
So I've
There
been,
must
I've
be
been working
something
with
else,
a, I've been working with a cloud vendor who very few people would know, so I won't mention their name. They have 15 data centers, something like 100,000 servers, 20 guys, and they run the vast majority of the IRS workloads. They happen to have underground bunker-style things with people with machine guns and barbed wire fences and all that gunk running around them, okay?
I did my tax 2 days ago.
So, are they secure
In
or
the
not?
cloud.
Well, the feds think they are. Okay. They also happen to have a burstable capacity, and so they call it a cloud. So, here's a lesson that you can derive from that. The notion of cloud, first of all, is a fungible one. We all know that. But there are providers who can provide this notion of elastic consumption of resource, compute network, storage, whatever it happens to be, who have gone through all of the hoops in terms of asserting the way that they control that infrastructure. And as we build better and better controls into the software and hardware stacks that we're building over time, you will see that level rise up. Right? So right now, can we say we can do it up to the point of which we have to assume some isolation structure for the burstable resource, and it's a VLAN? Yep, I'd say you could probably rely on that. Right? But some people wouldn't like that. Some Fed wouldn't like that. So they'd say, no, when I want my burstable resource, I want to just turn on a new physical server and only my stuff runs on it. That's also, as far as these guys are concerned, cloud. But if the customer's running 20,000 servers, 20,001 doesn't substantially change the price. Okay? All right.
As
So it's
the
still cloud.
resident phone guy, I'd like to respond to Rachel's provocative, or to be unprovoked attacks on the integrity. So, very seriously, when we talk about security, obviously security is a multidimensional and complex issue. And there certainly have been some issues with some of the cloud providers that can't be denied. But people have said there is no such thing as perfect security. So I would say, yes, that's probably true, and that perhaps cloud provider security is not perfect. However, I think that enterprise security for many enterprises is even less perfect.
Right. It's terrible.
And moreover, I think the important thing is that there are some, again, as we look at security without defining security or cloud, for me, one of the most interesting things is DDoS attacks. And the magnitude of attack traffic that can be generated by botnets these days. Some quick math that I love to quote for the audience is Mariposa. They just caught the guys behind Mariposa like 3-4 weeks ago. 12 million compromised PCs. You can pick your own number for what you think their uplink attack bandwidth might be. In some places in the world, it's 20 meg, 40 meg, maybe 100 meg. But let's be conservative and assume it's only 1 megabit of access per bot. So 12 million times 1 megabit is 12 terabits of attack bandwidth. Now, it's hard for me to understand how any enterprise can afford to be attacked with that kind of bandwidth for any period of time, right? We all know this is a serious problem. Very large integrated providers, I will use AT&T as an example.
Just because you happen.
Just happens to come to the top of my mind, but we have deployed dozens of Cisco CRS-1s. Each one of those can be configured up to a 92 terabit backplane. The new CRS-3s, which we're looking at, are 322 terabit per second backplanes, which means that if you take a Mariposa, you could have dozens of Mariposas attacking a single one of those dozens of routers, and it wouldn't even overwhelm that. So from a DDoS protection perspective, and the same stuff holds with everything else, when you put together DDoS Shield with things like AVAS, secure email gateway kinds of filtering, coupled with all the stuff that you guys were talking about, right? And
the number one thing, fewer humans.
Fewer humans, MPLS, non-spoofable label tagging, all of that together says, I think that's a pretty good way of building the most secure possible architecture that we can have with today's technology.
It's a good point. And to put that 12 million PC figure into another context, Mariposa alone accounts for 12 million. We reckon there's 600 million Windows PCs out there, so that's 2%. There's what, 200 people in this room? Which 4 of you are working in front of zombies?
That's right.
From that cheery thought, I wanted to go over some good news, some success stories with all of you. I wanted you to each tell a story about your favorite customer or somebody who's doing stuff with the cloud that you love. For me, it's Pathwork Diagnostics, a little San Mateo-based company. They have a huge library of tissue samples from tumors. And they create new diagnostic tests for unusual tumors that are hard to test for. And they burst up into EC2 for the capacity to do this. And so they've got far more compute power at their disposal than they did a few years ago. The reason this is really important to me is that one of my close friends has leukemia. She was referred for a bone marrow transplant in April last year, and then she became one of the first 50 people in a human trial for a brand new drug for her particular resistant strain. And so far, her leukemic cell count is at 0. So fingers crossed for Beth. Anyone else?
since we're here at SAP, I will use an SAP example, which is that for a large U.S. retailer who runs SAP, as evidently many do, we're actually part of an interesting architecture where they've got SAP in their enterprise. It's a different type of cloud burst scenario, which is actually a business continuity disaster recovery scenario where they can put SAP on our cloud-based platform, and as a result, they can spin it up in the event of a disaster at much lower cost than running a traditional sister site architecture, and much higher availability and lower RTO, and obviously the same or better RPO as running a sort of, older style warm site.
Since we all seem to live in hurricane country or earthquake country or tornado country these days, DR is obviously a huge application. Greg, do you have a good one?
Yeah, I like DR. So my story, what I was thinking about as well is, there's a lot of there's a lot of people doing really good stuff. So the big good news story is I think things are moving and people are doing a lot of good stuff and getting out of the static. I think my particular, which I can't mention who the customer was, but it's a DR situation where DR is a funny animal because you have ECAB, you have to declare disasters, and there's all these sort of mechanisms